Aloha and welcome back to E Hana Kako. We're a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. How is business doing in Hawaii? Well, that may depend upon what you're doing in business. There are a few people who know as well as Steve Petranik, the editor of Hawaii Business Magazine, and I'm delighted that today we're just going to take a free-ranging tour of what business is like here in the state. Please welcome to my program, Steve. Aloha to you.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you do good work on the magazine. I enjoy reading it. It's a lot of fun.
My favorite job of all time.
How long have you been a writer?
Well, I've been in the news business for about 35 years, 6 at Hawaii Business, but I was 18 years at the Star Bulletin and 5 at the Advertiser.
Your current edition deals with millennials.
Yes. The February issue, coming out in newsstands soon.
Well, I think that's rather fascinating because here in Hawaii, we've got a lot of millennials in the marketplace who are rising up in the job market, but we also have a lot who are leaving Hawaii because our business climate doesn't offer what other markets offer.
No, well, one of them is my son who
Is
lives
that right?
in Connecticut, works for General Electric. One will be my daughter, who is in 11th grade now, and she will be graduating, and she has no intention of staying here. She wants to see the big world, take on big world challenges. So that's very sad. I'm hoping they'll come back someday. But you're right, there's fewer opportunities.
That's right.
They're tech kids. My son's in, works in information technology for GE. My daughter's big into computers, engineering, that sort of thing. Very few jobs in those fields here.
Well, our eldest he is an attorney. He's a prosecutor. He's away for at least a good reason. He says there are more crooks in Brooklyn.
Thank goodness for that.
But, you know, that speaks to a long-term problem we have here in Hawaii, and that is our business climate is not ideal. It's not exactly what we'd like it to be. How would you describe the business climate here?
Challenging.
Is that right?
Challenging.
At what level? For the small business person or for corporations that are operating?
I think the small business person suffers the most because in a big corporation, you learn to navigate that. You have the economies of scale. When it's a one-person shop or a 10-person shop, you can't have people focus specifically on navigating that and spreading that bureaucracy, the dealing with the bureaucracy over 1,000 employees. You have to deal with it, and it comes down to small things like the permit process, where you're mired in a process that can be, 1, quite arbitrary, and 2, time-consuming. So I think one of the big challenges is to make it less arbitrary, less up to an individual's whim as to whether something goes or doesn't go. And the other thing is the process has to be speeded up, has to be much more efficient than it is now.
You know, I have a friend who opened up a multi-billion-dollar shipping company in Hong Kong. And he said it took him exactly 2 days to get the permits to operate.
Right.
Can you imagine that in Hawaii?
No.
Now, you know, the national rankings that we cover from time to time at the Grassroots Institute put Hawaii down in the 47th position compared to 50 states, 48th, sometimes 49th in terms of business regulatory environment, in terms of what it takes to actually run a small business here. Why do you think that's the case here in Hawaii? We're a small place. It should be easy for people to drive in and get their permits.
Yeah.
It should be easy to inspect restaurants and so forth. What do you think the problem is?
I think part of it's a mindset that there's this desire to control things excessively. There's a fear of damaging the environment, and that's a good fear to have. But I think there's sensible reasons to streamline the process, and there's so many ways that can be done. And the key is you need to look at something and see how it's actually being implemented. It looks great on paper. Every law looks great on paper. But when it's actually put into practice, then you can see the flaws in it. And we need to be reevaluating those things. And the problem is, once something is established, it's very hard to change it after that.
There's another problem we have too, and that is we're a very limited market in many ways. We're out here in the middle of the Pacific, our population is limited, small businesses can't service people who are driving in from out of state and so forth.
That's true.
And we also seem to be lacking, would you say, in investment capital from abroad?
It's one of the big problems here. It's a reason that, it's one of many reasons, one of several reasons that our startup tech community is not as advanced as we'd like it to be. Capital, lack of good programmers and other skilled people, and just that sort of synergy that comes from having a lot of different startup companies together. The community is growing. I'm really excited by the young people who are into the startup culture, but it needs to grow for it to grow. And we also need a few big successes. We need a company that makes that breakthrough, whether it's an IPO or it gets a big sale, and that we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and they see that big sale. Like, I mean, I don't see it has to be on the scale of Facebook or Twitter or one of those, but something big that gets people excited. Wow, Hawaii is a place where you can make money.
Well, you know, you talk about startups, and there are many wonderful companies with creative people that start up here.
Absolutely.
But what I tend to observe, and tell me if you see this, it's difficult to grow those companies after they've started up. Well, one in particular, Hoku Scientific.
Yeah.
What an exciting startup that was. It was nurtured here. The solar company and a couple of other components.
And hydrogen before the solar. I think it was hydrogen before its time. Hydrogen is one of those ideas where it always seems to be 2 or 3 years down the road, and it's been 2 or 3 years down the road for about 2 decades. So they were smart to shift towards solar, but there were a lot of solar companies, and theirs happened to be one that fell by the wayside.
And it seems as though after their initial startup, the smallness of Hawaii seemed to affect them. Their market, they found, wasn't big enough here. They had to sell outside of Hawaii. And their labor pool had to come from out of Hawaii. And even the opportunity, the need to generate energy to produce their product, didn't they have to locate their factory somewhere in the Midwest?
In Idaho.
Just to get the energy needed to supply to their manufacturing process.
So that there are a lot of obstacles there. On the other hand, the name that, Northern California called Silicon Valley, New York is using Silicon Alley. Well, the term here is now startup paradise. So instead of running away from this notion of Hawaii of the sun, sand, and surf, they're saying, okay, that's part of our charm for the startup community. We are attracting people who love to surf, who love to hike, and love to be out in the outdoors, but they also are great coders, and they're also great entrepreneurs. So putting accepting that that's what draws people here, and then trying to build on that and, accepting it, startup paradise. And I think that's a great idea. I think people will come here because it is Hawaii. I'm here because it's Hawaii. And if other people do, we might have not a great big startup community, but a great small startup community.
Well, Steve, I've heard people praise Hawaii as a destination to come to be invited to start something in.
Yeah.
But then after a while, the discourse seems to change. It's not possible to afford a house, for example. Those startups, which are so promising at the beginning, begin to experience the government regulation that prevents them from growing at the pace they want to grow. The resources are limited here. What can we do, and let me narrow it down to this, to turn Hawaii into a better investment climate, one that attracts investment from out of state, not simply in terms of people buying high-end condos on Ala Moana Boulevard, but what would bring the kind of monies needed to, let's say, fuel another super ferry project or to maintain the growth of high-tech industries?
I think the number one reform we can do is create a great public school system. I mean, and you talked about where we rank. Our public school system ranks down there 45th, thank goodness for Mississippi sort of place where people who want to come here, if they have kids, they're thinking, well, can I afford to send them to private school, or can I get into a district that's got a decent public school? I think if we fix the public school system, we're going to attract smart people here, but that's a huge challenge. That would be the number one fix. If I had a magic wand and I only had one wish, that'd be the one wish I would.
You must hear stories of people who talk about coming here and finding out that they can't send their kids to the private schools easily without getting another job, but are concerned about the public schools.
Absolutely, I hear it all the time from executives, because I'm dealing a lot with executives who want their kids to succeed too, and they're not willing to just put up with whatever comes along in terms of the school in their district. So a lot of them do end up sending their kids to private school, or they decide I can't afford it and move back to the mainland.
So what you're essentially saying is that a very big component of building business in Hawaii is having the conditions that make it possible for talented people with skills, professionals who can drive the business, having the conditions that make life affordable for them.
Absolutely.
And give them the needs, such as education for their children.
Right, and then we could grow a lot more of those people here rather than having to import them. More programmers, more people with entrepreneurial skills, marketing skills, whatever, that they're being produced by the local schools, maybe going on to UH and then staying here their whole lives instead of going off to the mainland for school and staying there like my son did.
Well, maybe going off to the mainland to get an education isn't such a problem, but finding the kind of compensation in a field that is meaningful to a highly educated person seems to be harder and harder here.
We did a story, I think it was last year, or maybe it was the year before, and it was written by a reporter who had done that. She had gone to the mainland, and she said she wasn't coming home. She eventually did, but that transition coming back is so hard for them. They have to take a pay cut, even though the cost of living is higher here. They have to take a sort of a job cut, that is, go to a lower level position because those senior positions aren't available. So many of those challenges. It's the rare person who can come to Hawaii and stay at that same salary, stay at that same career level.
Before we take a break, you wrote, or you basically published an edition which features a report on the Millennials.
Yes.
Tell me something about the Millennials that interests you.
They want immediate feedback. They don't want to wait for their annual report. They hate waste. They like to blend work and life, do the yoga class at 2 in the afternoon, but get back on their email and do work at 8 in the evening.
I would imagine that clashes with certain corporate cultures that expect somebody to be in at 9 and out at 5 and so forth. How are we doing in Hawaii in terms of managing these two kinds of cultures?
There's a lot of resistance to it, and I see it up close in people I know, and I see it in terms of, corporate culture. And the challenge is, do you have ways of measuring their output so you can say, well, they're doing the job, I don't need them in the office, I know they're effectively meeting their goals and so on. You need metrics to see that it works. Otherwise, you don't feel secure about them not being there and putting in the hours.
It kind of goes back to that control culture you were talking about in business. That if they're in the office, in their cubicle between certain hours, we're in control.
Right.
And somehow then they're productive. But the issue you're raising is whether that's productivity and whether productivity is enhanced by having a looser control system.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge for managers. Melissa Meyer at Yahoo, she basically banned telecommuting. She had metrics that said her telecommuters weren't being as effective, and she wanted them in the office to collaborate. That's huge. People want to be able to talk face to face. That's how great ideas are created. Hawaiian Airlines has taken it to the extreme. They have a huge office floor, and even the CEO is there in the bullpen, so to speak, with everyone else.
Well, that raises two questions. One, how many CEOs want to give up their private office? And two, how many employees want their CEO in the desk next to them?
Two good questions. And if you're in a bank, I've talked to the CEO of Central Pacific Bank, John Dean. He said, I can't be there in the bullpen because there's too much confidential information that's passing across my desk, and that's perfectly understandable. I'm not sure how Mark Dunkerley at Hawaiian Airlines faces that challenge. I'm sure he takes those private conversations into a private room, but so ordinary employees can go up to him and ask him a question.
Fascinating. My guest today is Steve Petranik, editor of Hawaii Business Magazine. We're talking about the business culture and climate in Hawaii, and when we return, we'll continue to do just that. Don't go away. This is Ehana Kako, and we're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We'll be right back.
Okay, this is ThinkTech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5 p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to the second portion of our program today, E Hana Kako. I'm talking with Steve Petranik, the editor of Hawaii Business Magazine. But first I want to say thanks to Jay Fidel, the producer of ThinkTech Hawaii, and all of the wonderful volunteers and staff who work here. Together they put on about 30 hours of original content, originating from Honolulu and going across the world. If you'd like to see some of that, visit www.thinktechhawaii.com. Now back to Steve Petranik of Hawaii Business Magazine. Steve, fascinating conversation so far.
Thank you.
I know we've talked a little bit about government. One of the comments you made earlier is that there's a lot of central control over our business climate, which affects our economy and so forth. What are your thoughts about the role government should play in building a business climate?
Oh, interesting. Well, I think it should be incentivizing business because obviously business is what creates the wealth that then that government then draws on to provide the services they provide, whether it's for the homeless or for our public schools or whatever. So it's vital that government incentivizes businesses. Otherwise, the whole situation collapses.
What kind of incentive would work for the typical small business here in Hawaii? Is it industry specific?
I think the typical small business person understands that they're going to operate in a competitive environment. They want something that's level, that's fair to everyone. So they're against the sort of favoritism that, you know, it's very hard to prove, but that people talk about a lot here. That certain, you know, the way is easier for certain people than it is for others. I think they want a system that's transparent. We were talking earlier about some of the rules about information and what restricts government information. We should know as much as possible about our government, and we don't. A lot of it's very opaque, and we want it transparent.
Well, you know, Steve, we actually have very beautiful language in our transparency laws. You're a journalist.
Yes.
You know, the sunshine laws are wonderful. Unfortunately, we don't have a shield law to protect your sources. But what's interesting, though, is that we have a very slow turnaround time for complaints.
Yes.
The Office of Information Practice that is supposed to handle complaints about whether information is made available has a very long turnaround time.
Right.
On average now, it's over 1 year to get back in touch with people.
And there's not a whole lot of pressure on the agencies to comply with that well-written sunshine law. Yes, what are the penalties for not going along with not actually following the law? Well, they're almost non-existent. So yes, the law is great, but in reality, not so great.
One of the areas of our economy and culture that has built something very strong in Hawaii has been the rise of the unions. From a period of time in which workers didn't have protections or guaranteed benefits and so forth, unions have become an important part of our culture, and they've built an entire political party and structure here in Hawaii. But do you think that the times have changed so much that we need some updating or revision in the way that we deal with our unions as a labor force in Hawaii?
Well, I think the unions nationally have almost vacated the private sector. They're all largely concentrated in public service now, state government, federal government, county governments across the nation. And to a lesser extent here, we still have very strong private sector unions. But I think that, yes, the influence of unions here is stronger than it should be. I think unions have a role at the table, but for instance, it's no coincidence that on election days, union contracts give union workers the day off. I don't have the day off. Do you have the day off? No, so I don't have that power of politicking on that very most important day of the year. And that's just one of the small ways
Sure.
that the field is tilted in favor of unions. And they are wonderful organizations for getting out the vote, for massing their membership on issues that are clearly in their best interest. And there's very few of the rest of us that have that organizational power. So they have the right to organize and do effectively. We need to create measures that make sure that their power is limited. I think the degree to which corporations have power in Washington is mirrored by the degree of power that unions have in Hawaii.
One would think that as times have changed, that all parties in negotiation will see the benefit of some updating. For example, we have such a high level of unfunded liabilities in the state employee retirement system, and even more in the employee health care system for retirees. If those systems fail to be strong, in the end, union members suffer as well.
Absolutely.
Everybody suffers. Do you foresee a time in our state when union negotiations will take that into consideration, as in some places like Silicon Valley, that's become a factor?
Well, full disclosure, my wife is is the chair of the communications department at UH Manoa, so she is on that. She's on the union there. She is eligible for a state government pension at the end of her term.
So be careful what you say. It could be your retirement.
Well, we've talked about this, the huge unfunded liability, and she's also counting on that medical coverage when she retires. We're not even putting anything away essentially for that fund. Those are huge things. We need to start paying that down, or we need to renegotiate the contract so our liability is not so high. I'm not getting a pension anymore. Almost no one in the private sector gets a pension. So the challenge is, how sympathetic am I to someone who's, say a teacher, who I understand, I'm getting this secondhand, so don't, but that the average female DOE teacher spends more time in retirement than she does on the job. That's a huge cost for all of us. And I don't think that I'm getting more and more reluctant to pay that cost, because I'm not getting a similar benefit from my job. I'm not sure I want that benefit to be available to all government workers. I think we need to end that.
Right. You're speaking as a taxpayer. You're speaking as a citizen who is not receiving such a pension.
And most people are not anymore.
But putting that aside, whether we think it's fair or whether we think it's right, let's simply isolate the question, can we afford this as a state? I think that's a very objective measure there, and we're moving into territory where we're finding that we can't afford the level of spending, which includes the level of negotiations that we've had in terms of union compensation and benefits.
Certainly not with the length of your work career that we have now, where you're, in the old days, what was it, when FDR got the Social Security passed, it was like 400 working people for every retired person. Now we're talking about maybe 1 or 2 working people per retired person. That's a huge difference. If you get to retire at 65 with a full pension, you've got a long lifetime ahead of you on average, and we can't afford to pay it.
Well, one of the reasons I was asking you about that is just to throw an idea out to you, something I've been thinking about for a while and something we've been researching at the Grassroots Institute. It seems as though a lot of people, our legislators, people in government, see the problem as the cost of government. And so the solutions are, how can we raise more revenues for government? How can we bring down the cost of government? How can we manage the unfunded liability? How can we handle union negotiations? But here's my thought. What if that's not the real problem? What if the problem is the robustness of the economy? Because if we had a booming economy, if
Right.
Hawaii was a center of global commerce, if we had investment coming in from all over, and we were growing the private sector, growing the commercial sector, individuals would benefit, and ultimately revenues would be there to fund government, which seems to be the exact opposite of the approach of trying to fund government to take care of people to handle the economy. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it is a challenge. For instance, where do we grow? We think tourism's
All right, let's
probably
talk
maxed
about
out.
tourism.
Tourism's probably maxed out.
It's a mature industry, very
Absolutely.
little
There's some growth
elasticity.
on the neighbor islands, but you know, there's resistance to growth on the neighbor islands. There's always resistance where, hey, I don't want more people on my beaches or my hiking trails, and that's a very understandable sentiment. The military spending here is probably going to go down,
That's
not
right.
go up. So where does it come? Well, a lot of people point to the tech community that we were talking about earlier. That would be great because those are high-paying jobs. They spin off a lot of different things. The upside is huge. I mean, Facebook, billions of dollars in an IPO. But everybody in the country, everybody in the world wants a high-tech industry. So you're competing with a lot of different people. Silicon Valley has got it right. Some other places, Austin, Research Triangle in North Carolina, the different places around the country have got it. Everybody wants it though. So that's a huge challenge. We talked about yes, I think you're right. The ideal would be to grow the economy. Then it solves a lot of problems.
A few steps could include what you spoke about earlier. Let's reduce the amount of regulation and the difficulty that small businesses face,
Right.
first of all, and have less total control over their activities so that we would allow them to have the incentives they need. Then you also talked about the fact that people care about the schools.
Yes.
And they care about housing, the cost of housing. In other words, it's the quality of life in Hawaii matters in terms of being able to attract productive people here to build the economy. How about some big issues as well? We know that we want to reduce the cost of energy in the state. But the problem with getting liquid natural gas in here, unless we do it through mats and containers, is we don't have any ships that comply with the shipping regulations under what is called the Jones Act to bring it in. If we got an exemption there, so Hawaii could bring in liquid natural gas, that could be a bridge fuel, and even perhaps bring down the overall costs of construction and shipping with another kind of exemption from the Jones Act. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that certain parts of the Jones Act make sense. That is, it's great to have a fleet of merchant ships that are American, so that in time of war and other crises, we can count on those ships with American crews and American-owned ships. I don't think they have to be made in America. We have a shipbuilding industry. We don't have to require that ships coming to Hawaii have been made here in America.
Well, what you're talking
It would save a lot of money and reduce that cost of shipping in and out of Hawaii a substantial amount if the ships could be purchased elsewhere. And they could bring in things like liquid natural gas. It would be easy to buy that ship on the open market.
Well, I like the way you're putting it because you're removing Jones Act reform from the language of pro or con or either for the Jones Act or against the Jones Act. What you're saying is that there's certain features of the Jones Act, like the fact that we use ships in port-to-port transport of goods that are owned by American companies, that are flagged in America, that have American employees, and we could leave all that intact, you say, and simply allow ourselves to buy our ships from our allies, bringing the price down tremendously.
Absolutely.
Well, that doesn't sound like a repeal of something sacred. That sounds like an update for the 21st century.
Well, and think of it this way: you can, from a business point of view, you can buy a ship almost immediately. You don't have to put in an order and wait for it to be built in Alabama or somewhere else, which can take years. And then suddenly, oh boy, there's a crisis and I can't afford this ship. Well, it's so much cheaper to be able to buy it from Korea or the other
Right.
ally, as you call them, allies, people that are very long-time American allies.
In fact, we could actually have an inter-island ferry system that was manned by Americans and union workers, for that matter,
Yeah.
owned by American companies, and we could have all of that if we lifted part of the Jones Act so we could buy those ferries from our allies at a discount.
Right.
And what would happen, Steve, if people could have competitive free markets between the islands? If a contractor could drive his truck over, work on another island, if somebody could deliver their poi and lau lau from Molokai to Oahu, what would happen to competition and business in Hawaii?
I think it would really incentivize, for instance, just to take a specific example, incentivize farming on the neighbor islands. There's a lot of land on the neighbor islands that could be used for farming. Experts have told us the Big Island itself could feed all of Hawaii
There you
easily.
go. And I could work in downtown Honolulu and just take the ferry home to Molokai, where I could afford a house.
You could.
I'm talking to Steve Petranik, editor of Hawaii Business Magazine. We're taking a look at the culture, the climate, and the possibilities for business in Hawaii. We'll be right back with our final segment after this. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and at the Grassroots Institute, we like to say Ehana Kako. Have you heard of a Pule Kako? Well, in Hawaii, that means let us pray together. At Grassroots, we also say Ehana Kako, let's work together. Think of the alternative, not working together. That's not suitable for a place in which we can build a better economy, a better government, and a better society. That's why I like talking with Steve Petranik, because he's all about working together.
Absolutely.
Editor of the Hawaii Business Magazine. Steve, in the break, you and I were going back to the subject of millennials.
Yes.
You pointed out that millennials are well suited to the kind of thinking that we need today in order to get people to come together and work on specific solutions, like perhaps updating the Jones Act rather than taking ideological sides, pro or con.
Absolutely. So they are willing to work with someone. They may disagree with them on a lot of issues, but they're willing to find common ground on these other parts. They're not that partisan. If you look at the numbers, both nationally and locally, the number of partisan millennials is much down from those of our generation, and so that makes.
You mean they don't want their father's Oldsmobile or political party?
Exactly. They're willing to reach across party lines. So they may have certain issues on the environment. They may have certain issues on food, but they're willing to work on other issues, possibly like the Jones Act or schools. Everyone's in favor of good schools. The idea of how to get to that point, and if we can diminish that partisanship, the anger and the ideological straitjackets that we put ourselves in, the solutions will be easier to come by.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to leave a couple of non-controversial issues for the closing of our program, like the budget of the University of Hawaii and the next era purchase of the Hawaiian Electric Company.
Yeah. Well,
but to talk about the university, we've seen a lot of difficulty there, not only in terms of the level of resources, but in terms of the management of that resources. What an unwieldy and huge, complex institution the university is.
Right. One of the challenges they face, and that's another issue that we're tackling in the February issue of the magazine, is that their budget process was based, they used what's called a historical budget process. Basically, what you get this year is based on what you got last year. It's not tied to how many students you have. So if you have a really great program and you're drawing in lots of students, you may not necessarily get any more money. In fact, you may get less money. There's no incentive to do that. So what the departments do is be very conservative. Oh, we better not offer that many courses because we might not get the money. Or, making other choices. They sometimes don't get their budget numbers until the semester has already started. What sort of business can operate where you can't plan in advance? You don't have no idea what your money's going to be when you need to be hiring people. So as a result, it's badly handled there.
Well, there is this disconnect between the process and the product. And as you point out, then, it's not possible to evaluate whether something is worth funding or not worth funding.
Yes.
Do you think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about central control? We've got so many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, controlling the one central university system.
Yeah.
We've got the state government, we've got the legislature, we've got the Board of Regents, we've got the administration, we've got any individual legislator sometimes.
Yeah.
We've got the unions, because labor is a huge factor of the production of the university and so forth. Do you think that our university might do better if it were more autonomous?
Well, I do, although the evidence of their competence in running university is mixed. I mean, obviously the Wonder Blunder is the most common example. The fact that they've had struggled to come up with a decent budget process. They're working on something now, a better system. Sorry, Anne, to my wife and to her colleagues, but I don't have the evidence that they are capable of doing that. I think in theory, yes, they should have more autonomy to spend the money as they see fit. But in practice, they've got to prove to me that they're capable of doing that.
Well, we've gone decades with basic central government control over the university. And so absolutely, the competence has not developed in that period of time because there hasn't been really the demand for it in terms of the university having to go out and get its own money by research grants and so forth, or endowments, as well as manage that. So I agree with you. It would take a long time. We're midstream no matter what.
Right. And as far as Hawaiian Electric goes, I don't know what company we're going to get. NextEra, if NextEra is allowed to take over, are we going to get the NextEra, which is a alternative energy, renewable energy company, or are we going to get the Xterra that runs the utility in Florida, which is not really all that interested in renewable energy? They have the reasons for that disconnect, and they'll tell you, well, in Florida, renewables didn't make as much sense because electricity was really cheap. What it was, 13 cents a kilowatt or something less than that. So solar rooftop didn't make sense in that kind of environment. It makes sense here. They're talking a good game right now. It would be interesting. I'm just not sure what we're going to get with NextEra. And I would like, if we decide that we want renewable energy, I think the PUC, the regulator of a monopoly, I think this is one of the cases where we need a regulator. If we're going to have a monopolistic utility, they need to be regulated. And I think we need to set the rules for the new Hawaiian Electric. This is the goal we want you. We want you to allow people to feed into the system. This is the parameters for what you should charge, and set these goals for them, and not let them run over the PUC.
Well, we're talking about Hawaii, but in many ways, we're doing so simply looking from within. You're familiar, very, very much so, with business in Asia and the Pacific and so forth. When we look at the measurement of robust free market economies, usually at the top is Hong Kong listed, and then Singapore, and some other East Asian markets. The United States is slipping, and Hawaii is fairly low in terms of the concentration of monopolies over various areas, whether it's energy or labor sectors such as education. Do you think there are any lessons that we can learn from Singapore or from Hong Kong that can be applied? Any takeaways that could build a more robust business economy here in Hawaii?
Well, I think Singapore's huge investment in education. I think the one thing, the biggest thing to admire about Singapore that applies to Hawaii is the both in primary education, high school, and higher education, they've made a huge investment, and they see themselves as a small, they're not going to make steel. They're not going to be a big steel making center. They're going to be an intellectual capital center. They want to be the intellectual capital of the world. And we should have great ambitions like that. We should be that place in America, because this is a wonderful place to live. So smart people should want to live here. And if we can provide them with good schools, good universities, and that kind of environment where innovation is valued, the sky's the limit. That's where we need to take the initiative.
I can tell you really value education and consider that it has a central role in building an economy. It's the second time you've talked about that.
Well, I'm the child of immigrants from Poland. My parents came to, they immigrated with nothing. Dad worked in a factory all his life, and education was my way out of that. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful schools, but I can see schools were better in my generation, and they're not as good. And that opportunity isn't as available to the kids today as it was in my time, and I want to change that.
Now, that's kind of ironic if we look at the values that are expressed about our public education system. They seem to be about opportunity, giving as much opportunity as possible. But that's a little bit different, isn't it, from what Singapore does? Singapore is trying to produce excellence at the highest levels,
Right.
as its focus, with the belief that those who are not as excellent will rise up. What are your thoughts about this?
The stereotype of the smart Asian kid, and studies actually show that they're no smarter than white kids or any other kids, but the culture, an Asian culture, whether it's Chinese or Japanese or Korean, the kids are told to work harder. You get a C on your, it's not because you're dumb, it's because you didn't work hard enough. So then they work harder and harder. At my daughter's school, they joke that a B is an Asian F. The families expect them to get a good grade, and they work hard for it. So I think there's part of the culture is part of it. How much do you value education and working hard and doing all the things you need to do to succeed? Should be valued very highly.
Well, that's interesting. I think there is a connection between the economy and education, and no less a luminary than Milton Friedman believed that. He's known for his free market philosophy, but the thing he was most passionate about was the free markets in education, the use of competition to produce the best quality education available to the most people. He considered to be at the heart of driving forward a free economy.
I agree absolutely with him. And now it's, my wife and I invested a lot. We sent our kids to Punahou because we saw that gave our children a step up over kids who were going to public school. And I know some people would criticize us, but we were willing to invest, it's $20,000 a year to send your kid to Punahou. That's a lot of money I would have liked to have for a new car.
Well, then in that case, your wife better not lose her pension. Steve, sorry to cut you off,
that's
but
all right.
It's been delightful talking to you about Hawaii's business climate.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Your wealth of information, your magazine, Hawaii Business Magazine, is also. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Steve Petranik, editor of Hawaii Business Magazine, has been our guest today. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, signing off for E Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Until next week, aloha.